You just signed your death warrant.
5 words that would shatter a billion-dollar victory and resurrect a decade-old betrayal that should have stayed buried. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because to understand how Alexis Morgan, one of the youngest black female CEOs in America's cutthroat tech industry, found herself staring into the cold grey eyes of her fiercest rival as he delivered that chilling warning, we need to go back. Back to a time when they weren't enemies at all. Back to when they were partners, friends, maybe even something more. 10 years ago, in the fluorescent-lit laboratories of MIT, 2 brilliant grad students were building a dream. Alexis Morgan, a determined young black woman from working-class Atlanta, had clawed her way into one of the world's most elite engineering programs. She was used to being the only one who looked like her in any room she entered, used to fighting twice as hard for half the respect. But she had fire in her veins and a vision that could change the world, a revolutionary clean energy prototype. A solar fusion battery so efficient, so compact, it could power entire neighborhoods with renewable energy. Cheap, accessible, transformative, and working beside her, burning the same midnight oil, was Ethan Cross, a white guy from rural Ohio with sandy blonde hair and an easy smile, who came from nothing and understood what it meant to be the underdog. They clicked instantly. Late-night brainstorming sessions that bled into early morning coffee runs, teasing each other over whose code was messier. His hand brushing hers as they hunched over circuit boards, her breath catching for just a moment. The way he'd run his fingers through his hair when he was stuck on a problem. The way she'd chew her lip when deep in thought. Her brown eyes lighting up like fire when she solved an equation. There was something there, something unspoken, something they were both too focused or too afraid to explore. So they poured everything into their work instead. Under the guidance of Professor Braxton, a mentor they trusted completely, they built something extraordinary. Their prototype worked. It actually worked. At 22 years old, they held the future in their hands. And then Professor Braxton stole it. Alexis sat in that corporate presentation, stunned into silence as she watched her trusted mentor unveil their research to Titan Energy Ventures. Without them, the company had paid handsomely for the patent. In one cruel stroke, everything they'd built, everything they'd dreamed of, was gone. Sold. Stolen. Alexis was livid. She wanted to fight, to expose the theft, to drag Braxton through every legal channel available. The injustice of it burned through her like acid. But when she stormed into Ethan's dorm room that night, ready to plan their counterattack, she found him sitting on the edge of his bed with his face buried in his hands. And on his desk sat a contract from Titan Energy Ventures. "They're offering us a deal," he said quietly, and Alexis felt the floor drop out from under her. Blood money. That's what it was. A generous payout and a corporate position for Ethan, on the condition that they stay silent, that they let Braxton and Titan get away with it. "This is wrong," Alexis said, her voice shaking with outrage. "They stole our work." But then Ethan looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes and said the words. That would break everything between them. "My sister has leukemia." Chloe, his younger sister, barely 15, was dying. And Braxton, that manipulative bastard, had found out, had used it. The deal would cover Chloe's treatment, would save her life. "What choice do I have?" Ethan whispered, and Alexis felt her heart tear in two. She wanted to be compassionate, wanted to help. But this was their future, their work, their dream. "There's always a choice," she said, stepping back from him. "We could fight, we could expose them, we could find another way to help Chloe, together." Ethan looked away. "I can't risk it. She doesn't have time." And in that moment, Alexis understood. He was going to take the deal. He was choosing the payout over their principles, over her. "If you sign that NDA and take their money," she hissed through tears she couldn't hold back, "you'll have sold your soul. Don't expect me to ever forgive you." He reached for her, but she was already gone. The next day, Ethan signed, secured his sister's treatment, launched his corporate career, and Alexis, she fought alone, reported the theft to anyone who would listen. But without Ethan's testimony, her case fell apart. Braxton and Titan covered their tracks. The prototype disappeared into a corporate vault, never to be developed. And Alexis left MIT with a shattered heart and a burning determination to prove she didn't need anyone. Especially not Ethan Cross. 10 years later, they'd both become legends. Alexis built Morgan Energy from her garage into a billion-dollar empire, one of the few black women to ever helm a major tech company. Ethan launched Cross Industries, becoming a visionary CEO haunted by guilt he could never quite shake. And every time their companies crossed paths, it made headlines. Morgan versus Cross. Two former prodigies turned bitter rivals, trading barbed comments and icy stares across boardrooms and conference stages. Until tonight. Until Alexis won the auction for a bankrupt startup's intellectual property, technology that was strikingly similar to their stolen prototype from 10 years ago. Her second chance. Her redemption. She was still clutching the signed contract when Ethan stepped from the shadows and leaned close. "You just signed your death warrant." His voice wasn't angry. It was terrifying. And as Alexis stared into those grey eyes, no longer cold with competition, but burning with urgent fear, one question crystallized in her mind. Was he threatening her, or desperately trying to save her life? The threat came at 11:47 p.m. Alexis was alone in the underground parking garage, her heels clicking against concrete that suddenly felt too vast, too empty, too exposed. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, until she saw the message that made her blood run cold. "Walk away from the project, or you'll regret it." And below that, an address. Her parents' house in Atlanta. The house where her mother still tended her garden every Sunday morning. Where her father watched football games on the porch. Where her grandmother had taught her to make sweet potato pie in a kitchen filled with love and laughter. They knew where her family lived. Alexis's hands trembled as she scanned the garage. Empty cars, shadows stretching between concrete pillars, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead suddenly sounding like a warning. She fumbled for her keys, every instinct screaming at her to move, to run, to get somewhere safe. She was halfway to her car when she heard it, an engine roaring to life behind her. Headlights exploded across the garage like searchlights hunting prey. A black SUV, massive and menacing, peeling out from between parked cars and accelerating straight toward her. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was an execution. Alexis ran. Not the careful CEO stride she'd perfected over a decade of boardroom battles, but a full sprint, her designer heels abandoned as she dove into her car. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely get the key in the ignition. Behind her, the SUV was closing the distance, its engine a mechanical growl promising violence. She slammed the accelerator. Her car lurched forward, tires squealing as she whipped around a concrete pillar, the SUV so close she could see its blacked-out windows in her rearview mirror. No license plate, no identification, just pure, deliberate menace. The chase exploded through the parking structure's tight lanes, a nightmare of hairpin turns and near collisions, headlights strobing off pillars, the SUV trying to ram her, to force her into a wall, to end this right here in the darkness where nobody would see. Alexis's mind was racing faster than her car. Who were these people? How far would they go? She yanked the wheel hard left, shooting up the exit ramp into the rain-slicked streets of San Francisco. The city lights blurred into neon streaks as the pursuit continued, splashing through puddles, the SUV matching her every desperate turn. A red light ahead. No choice. Alexis wrenched the wheel left down a one-way alley, her car barely fitting between brick walls that scraped her mirrors. Behind her, the SUV tried to follow, too big, too fast on wet pavement. It skidded, smashed into a row of garbage bins with a metallic crunch that echoed through the alley. And in that precious moment of chaos, Alexis punched the accelerator and disappeared into the labyrinth of city streets, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She didn't go home. She went straight to the nearest police station, shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. The officers took her statement, promised to review traffic cameras, but Alexis could see it in their eyes. The skepticism, the bureaucratic weariness. Road rage, they suggested. Maybe a drunk driver. She didn't mention the project. didn't mention Titan Energy. Because, as she sat in that fluorescent-lit police station at midnight, another realization was crystallizing. If these people, whoever they were, had found her parents' address, if they'd orchestrated a chase through downtown San Francisco with professional precision, then this wasn't random. This was organized, funded, deliberate. And maybe, God, she hated admitting this, maybe Ethan had been trying to warn her. Her fingers hovered over her phone. Pride warred with survival instinct. She'd spent 10 years building walls against Ethan Cross, 10 years proving she didn't need him, didn't need anyone. But those walls wouldn't stop a bullet, wouldn't protect her family, wouldn't bring justice if she ended up as another mysterious accident buried in a corporate scandal that never quite got investigated. She dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Alexis? His voice was breathless, urgent, like he'd been waiting for this call, like he'd been terrified she wouldn't make it long enough to dial. Your dramatic pronouncement might have had some merit, she said, steadier than she felt. I was just chased by a black SUV after receiving a threat about the project. The sharp intake of breath on the other end told her everything. This wasn't news to Ethan. This was confirmation of his worst fears. Are you okay? The raw concern in his voice cut through her defenses like a blade. For now. Listen, Ethan. She swallowed her pride, forcing out the words. If you have information, I need it. What do you know about Titan and this tech that I don't? Silence. Then, meet me somewhere public, somewhere safe. We shouldn't talk about this over the phone. The paranoia in that statement should have seemed excessive. Instead, it felt appropriate. The 24-hour diner near Golden Gate Park, 30 minutes. I'll be there. The line went dead, and Alexis sat in her car in the police station parking lot, rain drumming on the roof, wondering what the hell she'd just set in motion. Was she really about to trust Ethan Cross, the man who'd betrayed her when she needed him most? But what choice did she have? Someone had just tried to kill her, or at least terrify her into submission, and Ethan had warned her, had looked genuinely afraid for her life. That had to count for something, didn't it? The diner was a beacon of normalcy in the chaos, bright lights, the smell of coffee and bacon, the clatter of dishes and low murmur of late-night conversations. Alexis chose a booth with clear sightlines to the door and windows, her back to the wall. Old habits from Atlanta, where her father had taught her to always know her exits. She was still in her work clothes, though she'd thrown on a trench coat, and she caught her reflection in the window. Wide-eyed, tense, looking more vulnerable than she'd allowed herself to appear in years. When Ethan walked in, shaking rain from his sandy blonde hair, the relief on his face was unmistakable. He crossed the diner in quick strides and reached out to touch her arm, an instinctive gesture, checking that she was real, that she was okay. "Thank God you're all right," he said, and the genuine emotion in his voice made something in Alexis's chest twist painfully. She nodded, gestured for him to sit. "I filed a police report, but I doubt it'll stop whoever's behind this." She kept her tone businesslike, professional, building those walls back up, even as they threatened to crumble. "Tell me everything, Ethan. What exactly are we dealing with?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, that anxious habit she remembered from late nights when a problem wouldn't solve, when the code wouldn't compile, when the world felt too heavy. He leaned forward, lowering his voice beneath the diner's ambient noise. "After I joined Titan, I learned things that made me sick. They never planned to develop our prototype, Alexis. They wanted it dead, because it threatened their other investments, coal partnerships, oil, contracts, even their legacy battery lines that were less efficient but more profitable. They paid Braxton to scout promising technology at universities, snatch it up, and bury it. We weren't the first. We won't be the last." Alexis's hands clenched into fists under the table. It made perfect, horrible sense. Profit over progress. Greed over innovation. So now that I have it, they'll try to squash it again. Worse. Ethan's face was grim, haunted. Over the years, other researchers tried working on similar tech. Small startups, independent labs, they all failed. And not naturally. There were accidents. Lab fires, car crashes, bankruptcies that happened too conveniently. I never had proof, but the pattern was there. Titan, or people connected to them, eliminating competition. He looked down, guilt etched in every line of his face. I should have warned you sooner, should have reached out when I first heard whispers about this auction. But after how we ended, his voice dropped to barely a whisper. I didn't think you'd ever want to hear from me again. The honesty in that confession hit Alexis harder than she expected. She studied his face, the remorseful earnestness, the fear for her safety that seemed to outweigh his own self-preservation. This was the man she'd spent countless hours with, the one who used to know her better than anyone. Before the betrayal, before the walls. Could she really trust him again? Or was this just another manipulation? But then she remembered the SUV, the threat to her family, and she realized she didn't have the luxury of doubt. I wish I'd known, she said softly. But would I have even believed you without seeing it myself? A ghost of a smile. I was always stubborn. You were, Ethan agreed. And for a moment they shared a flicker of their old camaraderie, a crack in the decade-long ice between them. The waitress interrupted to pour coffee, and Alexis noticed Ethan had ordered for both of them, a burger for himself, and for her, a slice of sweet potato pie. Her favorite, he remembered. After 10 years of rivalry and silence, he still remembered. The realization brought warmth and pain in equal measure, because why did he have to make this complicated? Why couldn't he just be the villain she'd needed him to be? As they huddled over coffee that grew cold while they talked, a plan emerged. Alexis wouldn't back down, couldn't back down. This technology was too important, not just to Morgan. Energy's mission, but to her personally. It was reclaiming what had been stolen, proving that principle could win over corruption, and Ethan, surprising her with his determination, offered to help. We'll combine resources, he said. I can assign my best R&D people to work with yours in a secure location. We'll keep the project secret until it's ready to launch. And I have contacts from my Titan days who might know their next move. We can get ahead of it. Alexis raised an eyebrow, the irony not lost on her. You're suggesting we work together, Morgan and Cross? After a decade of being rivals, it felt surreal, like reality had tilted sideways and left them in an alternate timeline. Ethan met her gaze steadily. This tech was ours from the start, Alexis. Maybe it's fate giving us another shot. Not just at the project, but at doing things right. I know I don't deserve it. His voice cracked slightly. But let me help protect it. Protect you. She wanted to snap that she didn't need his protection, that she'd built an empire without him and could handle this alone. But the memory of that SUV bearing down on her, the professional precision of that chase, the threat to her family, it all crashed back over her. Pride wouldn't stop these people. Pride wouldn't keep her alive. She gave a curt nod. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you, she said, the words harder than she felt. I'm doing this for the tech, for my company. I'll accept your help, for now. Ethan nodded, accepting that answer like a man who knew he deserved worse. That's all I ask. For now, he hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features. And when this is over, maybe I can earn your trust again. Somehow. Alexis looked away, walls firmly back in place, one step at a time. But even as she said it, she wondered, was she protecting herself from betrayal, or from the possibility that he might actually prove himself worthy of forgiveness? And which scared her more? Over the next 72 hours, two rival CEOs became unlikely allies in a shadow war. Under absolute secrecy, Alexis moved the prototype design and all related research to a secure Morgan Energy facility outside San Francisco, a converted warehouse with military-grade security, biometric locks, and a location known only to a handful of people. She handpicked 5 engineers from her company, people she'd worked with for years, people whose loyalty she trusted with her life. Ethan did the same, selecting experts from cross-industries who'd proven themselves discreet and brilliant in equal measure. The joint team was bewildered but excited. Many had never imagined their famously competitive CEOs would collaborate on anything except mutual destruction. But Alexis simply told them, "We're fighting for something bigger than our rivalry," and the conviction in her voice made them believe it. Because they could feel it, the urgency, the danger, the sense that they were involved in something that mattered beyond quarterly earnings and stock prices. But maintaining the illusion was exhausting. In public, Alexis and Ethan continued their rivalry like actors in an elaborate play. At a tech conference panel that week, they debated energy policy with their usual sharp-edged banter, trading veiled barbs about innovation versus recklessness, sustainability versus profitability. The audience ate it up. Morgan versus Cross, the eternal rivalry. But under the table, both their phones buzzed with encrypted messages about Titan's possible moves, about security concerns, about the progress their secret team was making. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. One moment feigning conflict under stage lights, cameras capturing their every expression for headlines and social media. The next moment huddled in the secure lab's conference room, surrounded by whiteboards filled with equations and threat assessments, working together like they were 22 again, and the world was full of possibility instead of danger. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Ethan's old contact came through, a former Titan engineer named Marcus, who'd quietly left the company years ago after witnessing things that made him question his own morality. He agreed to meet them in a parking garage downtown, classic spy movie style that would have been comical if it weren't so deadly serious. Titan has what they call a strategic operations division, Marcus told them, glancing nervously over his shoulder. He was a small man in his 50s, thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looking like someone's accountant uncle who'd accidentally stumbled into corporate espionage. Officially, it's for competitive intelligence. Unofficially, they use private security contractors to handle problems, make them disappear. I saw paperwork once, payments to firms with mercenary connections, NDAs so thick you could build a house with them, and the person running it. He swallowed hard. It's Professor Braxton. Alexis felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Their old mentor, the man who'd stolen their work and destroyed their partnership, was now orchestrating threats against them. The betrayal from 10 years ago wasn't finished. It was still unfolding, still poisoning their lives. "He's trying to kill us," she said flatly. His former students, Marcus nodded miserably. "I don't think he sees it that way. I think to him, you're just obstacles, threats to Titan's bottom line. He's risen high in that company by being ruthless." He handed Ethan a thumb drive. "This has what I could safely copy without getting caught. Financial records, coded communications. It's not a smoking gun, but it's a start." They thanked him, watched him hurry away into the night, and stood in that parking garage holding evidence that could expose a conspiracy or get them killed if they mishandled it. "We need more," Alexis said, her mind already strategizing. "Something concrete we can use to either bring them down legally or keep them at bay. We can't spend our lives looking over our shoulders." Ethan agreed immediately. If we expose their tactics, even just to authorities or press, they'll think twice. Braxton's operated in shadows. Time to drag those actions into the light. Back at the secure lab, they brought in Priya, one of Ethan's data specialists, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who could make spreadsheets reveal secrets like tarot cards. She dove into Marcus's thumb drive and cross-referenced it with public records, patent filings, corporate registrations, and after 3 days of obsessive digging, she found something beautiful and damning. "Look at this," Priya said, pulling up a web of connections on the main screen. "Right before that startup went bankrupt, the one whose tech you just acquired, Titan created a shell company that invested in them, not directly, but through 3 layers of corporate veils. They were trying to gain control quietly. When the startup refused to sell, suddenly they had financial troubles. Key employees quit, equipment failures, and then bankruptcy." She clicked through more files. "And these payments, Titan to a consulting firm called Sentinel Solutions." I ran that name. "They've got a reputation for corporate espionage, sabotage for hire, the whole dirty playbook. It wasn't definitive proof of violence, but it was a pattern, a trail, evidence of unethical and possibly illegal corporate warfare. They had something to work with. But as they gathered this evidence, the sense of danger intensified like a gathering storm. The enemy knew they were digging. 2 days into their collaboration, Ethan's company's servers faced a sophisticated hacking attempt, Russian IP addresses, advanced malware, the kind of attack that required serious funding and expertise. Their IT team barely stopped it, and the message was clear. Someone was trying to see what Cross Industries knew about the lost bid. Then Alexis's security intercepted a drone hovering near the warehouse facility, small, commercial grade, equipped with a camera. Someone was conducting surveillance, trying to see who was coming and going, what they were working on. The cat-and-mouse game was fully engaged, and both sides knew the stakes. Through it all, the investigation, the threats, the mounting pressure, Alexis and Ethan found themselves working late more often than not. After the joint team went home, it would be just the two of them in the quiet lab, surrounded by the hum of equipment and the glow of computer screens, piecing together a conspiracy that reached deeper than either had imagined. And in those quiet hours, something shifted between them. Something neither could quite name or wanted to acknowledge, because acknowledging it would mean vulnerability, and vulnerability was dangerous when you were being hunted. One night, Alexis took off her blazer, the lab warm from equipment running calculations all day. She was in a sleeveless blouse, and Ethan noticed the small scar on her upper arm, a faded mark she'd carried since MIT. "You still have that?" he asked softly, nodding toward it. Alexis glanced at the scar, a ghost of a smile on her lips. It was from a circuit that had misfired during an all-night session, burned her arm badly enough to make Ethan panic and insist on driving her to the ER despite her protests. "Battle scars," she said lightly. "Part of me wanted to keep it as a reminder of how reckless we were, chasing our dreams." She paused, then added with unexpected tenderness, "I also remember you freaking out, insisting we go to the hospital even though it was hardly more than a bad blister." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, that telltale gesture of embarrassment. "Can you blame me? We'd been awake 36 hours straight. I wasn't exactly rational." He met her eyes. "Besides, I cared about you." The words hung in the air, past tense grammatically, but present in implication. Alexis felt her breath catch. Had he felt more back then? Had there been something they'd both been too focused or too afraid to explore? She searched his face, looking for answers to questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. The moment felt delicate, fragile, like standing on the edge of something profound and terrifying. But a computer pinged. Another batch of encrypted Titan emails had finished decrypting, and the spell broke. Back to work, back to safety. The emotional armor slipped into place, but cracks had formed, and they both knew it. The breakthrough came on day 7 of their collaboration. Priya had finally cracked the encryption on a particularly protected file from Marcus's thumb drive. She called them both over, her face pale. "You need to see this, now." On the screen was an email, dated just 4 days ago, from Professor Braxton to Titan Energy's CEO, a man named Howard Vance, who'd built his fortune on oil and coal before pivoting to clean energy that was really just greenwashing. The subject line was innocuous, status update, Morgan acquisition, but the contents were chilling. Braxton detailed containment measures for the energy prototype now that Morgan Energy had acquired it. In cold corporate language stripped of any humanity, he outlined a multi-stage plan. First, economic pressure. Titan would use its market influence to create obstacles for Morgan Energy, drive down stock prices, and spread doubt about the technology's viability. Second, if economic pressure fails, industrial sabotage, target the prototype development, cause delays, safety incidents, anything to prevent it from reaching the market. And third, if those measures proved insufficient, more direct actions, including accidental harm to key personnel. Alexis read that last phrase 3 times, her hands shaking. Key personnel. That meant her, possibly her top engineers, anyone critical to the project's success. Braxton was planning her death like it was just another line item in a quarterly budget. "There's more," Priya said quietly, scrolling down. "He mentions leveraging insider knowledge of Morgan's operation. He has someone inside your company, Alexis." The room spun. A mole. Someone she trusted, someone with access, had been feeding information to Braxton, feeding him details about her security, her movements, her plans. That's how they'd known about the parking garage. How they'd known when she'd be vulnerable. Ethan was already pulling out his phone. We run background checks on everyone. Right now, anyone with access to this project gets scrutinized down to their elementary school teachers. Within an hour, Alexis's head of security had the answer, and it made her want to scream. Devin Marsh, a junior engineer she'd personally hired 6 months ago based on his impressive resume and seemingly genuine passion for clean energy. Background check revealed he was a distant cousin of Braxton's wife, and phone records showed a series of brief calls to an unlisted number during the past week, always late at night, always after he'd been in the secure facility. The betrayal felt personal in a way that surprised Alexis. She'd mentored Devin, had seen potential in him, had trusted him with work that mattered, and he'd sold her out. Just like Braxton had sold out their research 10 years ago. Just like Ethan had. No. She stopped that thought. Ethan had been coerced, manipulated by threats to his dying sister. This was different. Devin had been bought. She confronted him that night in the lab, with Ethan standing beside her and security flanking the doors. The rest of the team had gone home. Devin was alone at a workstation, supposedly running overnight tests. When Alexis said his name, cold and sharp as a blade, he looked up with false innocence that crumbled the moment he saw her face. "How much did he pay you?" Alexis asked, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "How much was I worth to Braxton?" Devin's face went pale, then red. He stammered denials at first, but under the weight of her stare, the disappointed rage of a mentor betrayed, he collapsed like a house of cards. 50,000, he whispered. He said it was just corporate intelligence, that I wouldn't get in trouble, that nobody would get hurt. His voice rose desperately. "I didn't know they'd try to kill you. I swear I didn't know." "Get him out of my sight," Alexis said flatly, turning away before she said something she'd regret. Or did something she'd regret. As security escorted a sobbing Devin away, she felt Ethan's hand on her shoulder, steadying, supportive. Not the betrayer this time, but the ally. And somehow, that made everything more confusing, because her emotions were a tangled mess of anger and fear, and something else she didn't want to name. With the mole removed and damning evidence in hand, they prepared their counter-offensive. Alexis reached out through secure channels to a federal investigator she knew at the Department of Energy, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd built a career on exposing corporate corruption. Alexis sent an anonymous data dump, everything they'd compiled, with a message, Titan. Energy is engaging in criminal conspiracy to suppress clean energy technology. This is just the beginning of what we have. Simultaneously, they contacted a trusted tech journalist, a Pulitzer finalist named James Rodriguez who'd broken major scandals before. They provided copies of documents under strict embargo. Nothing could be published until Alexis gave the word. It was their insurance policy, their dead man's switch. If anything happened to them, if Braxton's direct actions succeeded, the truth would explode across headlines worldwide. But they both knew that Braxton didn't know they had the email yet. Devin's sudden disappearance might tip him off that his mole was compromised, but not that they'd obtained the smoking gun, which meant he might act swiftly, feeling cornered, trying to eliminate the problem before it grew worse. And they were right. It happened on the 8th night. Alexis and Ethan were alone in the secure facility, running final checks on their data backups. Every piece of evidence, every research file, every iteration of the prototype design was being encrypted and stored off-site in multiple locations. If Titan tried to physically destroy the lab, they'd lose nothing critical. It was past midnight. The facility was mostly silent except for the steady hum of servers and the occasional buzz of fluorescent lights. That's when the power died. One moment, bright overhead lighting and glowing computer screens. The next, absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that feels physical, suffocating. Then red emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in a crimson glow that turned the familiar lab into something nightmarish. Alexis's phone buzzed with a security alert. She pulled it up with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. The screen showed security camera feeds, multiple armed figures in tactical gear cutting through the perimeter fence. Military precision. Professional equipment. 5 men, possibly 6, moving toward the building in a coordinated sweep. "Security's on the way," Alexis whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "But they're 10 minutes out minimum." She grabbed an emergency hard drive, a small unit containing everything they'd compiled, and clipped it to her belt. "We need to get out. Now." Ethan nodded, his face grim in the red light. They moved quickly but carefully toward a side exit that led to wooded area behind the complex. Alexis had insisted on multiple escape routes when setting up this facility, and now that paranoia was saving their lives. They were halfway down the corridor when a figure appeared at the end, silhouetted against emergency lighting, dressed in black tactical gear, holding a pistol with a suppressor attached. He spotted them immediately. "Stop! Hands up!" Ethan reacted on instinct, pulling Alexis behind a thick concrete pillar as 2 bullets spat from the silenced weapon, pop, pop, impacting the wall where her head had been half a second earlier. The sound was quiet, efficient, professional. This wasn't intimidation. This was assassination. Alexis's heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. Someone was actually trying to kill them. Her mind raced through options as heavy footsteps approached their position. She remembered a lab storage room to their left. If they could get inside, it connected to a workshop with an exterior garage door. A way out. She squeezed Ethan's hand, pointed. He understood immediately, nodding. As the footsteps grew closer, he grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall mount. In one fluid motion, he slid out and hurled it down the hallway. The heavy metal cylinder clattered and rolled past the shooter, who flinched and spun toward the noise. That split second was all they needed. Alexis and Ethan sprinted to the storage room door. She swiped her keycard with trembling hands, and they slipped inside, locking it behind them. The shooter realized the ruse immediately. They heard him shout something into a radio, followed by the thunder of multiple sets of boots converging on their position. Inside the storage room, they moved fast through aisles of equipment and supply crates. The red emergency lighting barely penetrated here, leaving them navigating by memory and the faint glow of Ethan's phone flashlight. They could hear the mercenaries outside, orders being barked, something heavy being used to break through the door they'd just locked. They reached the far door to the workshop. Alexis grabbed the handle, paused, looked at Ethan. For one suspended moment, they just stared at each other, 2 people who'd loved, lost, hated, and now faced death together. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "thank you for trying to warn me." "Whatever happens," he replied, "I'm glad I got the chance to make things right. Or start to." Then the storage room door behind them exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood and metal, and the moment shattered. They plunged into the workshop, Ethan immediately running to the control panel for the garage door. He slammed the button, and the door began its slow mechanical grind upward, revealing rain-drenched darkness outside. "That's enough," Alexis hissed when the gap was barely 2 feet high. They dropped and rolled under the partially open gate, out into mud and cold rain and blessed open air. The woods were 50 yards ahead, cover, darkness, a chance at survival. They ran. Behind them, shouts erupted as the mercenaries saw the open gate. A bullet pinged off concrete near Alexis's feet, and she gasped but kept sprinting, her lungs burning, her legs pumping, rain plastering her hair to her face. Ethan was right beside her, matching her pace, and she could hear his labored breathing, could feel the same terror and determination that fueled her own body. 20 yards from the tree line, a figure burst from the side of the building, another mercenary who'd flanked around, anticipating their escape route. He lunged at Alexis, his hand closing around her arm like a vice, yanking her back toward the building. She cried out, struggling, twisting, trying to break free. But he was bigger, stronger, trained for this. He was dragging her backward, his other hand reaching for something on his belt, zip ties probably, or a weapon, when Ethan hit him like a freight train. They went down in the mud, a tangle of limbs and violence. The mercenary's gun went off, a muffled shot that made Alexis's heart stop as they wrestled in the rain-soaked darkness. She couldn't tell if anyone was hit, could barely see through the rain and her own terror. Ethan landed a solid punch, disarming the man, but another figure was emerging from the building, weapon raised and aimed at them both. Alexis didn't think. The fallen mercenary's handgun was on the ground, mud-slicked and deadly. She picked it up, heavier than she'd expected, cold and alien in her hands. She'd only fired a gun a handful of times, at a range, with an instructor. But her security coach's voice echoed in her memory. Plant your feet, 2 hands. Aim for center mass. Squeeze, don't pull. She planted her feet, raised the weapon, aimed at the advancing figure's leg. She didn't want to kill, just stop, and squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked, a thunderous flash in the night. The report was deafening, nothing like the suppressed weapons the mercenaries carried. And the man went down, screaming, clutching his thigh. She'd hit her target. Alexis dropped the gun like it burned, her hands shaking violently. She'd shot someone. Actually shot another human being. The reality of it crashed over her. The weight, the responsibility, the awful necessity of it. But then red and blue lights flashed at the edge of the property. Sirens wailed. Security vehicles and police cars were screaming up the access road, alerted by the gunshots and alarms. Seeing law enforcement arriving in force, the mercenaries made a tactical decision. They grabbed their wounded comrade and melted back into darkness, unwilling to engage in a firefight with police. Within minutes, they'd vanished as professionally as they'd arrived, leaving only spent shell casings and blood in the mud as evidence they'd existed at all. Alexis turned to find Ethan pinning the first mercenary down, knee pressed into his back. He was soaked, bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow, but otherwise okay. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she almost collapsed. Security teams fanned out around them, officers shouting orders, but all she could see was Ethan looking at her with that same desperate relief mirrored in his eyes. He released the mercenary to the security team and immediately pulled Alexis into an embrace. Rain and mud and blood and all. She let herself collapse against him, her whole body shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, replaced by shock and exhaustion. His arms around her felt solid, safe, real. He was trembling too, she realized, not from cold, but from the terror of almost losing her. "You're okay," he murmured into her wet hair, as much to convince himself as her. "We're okay. We made it." She clung to his shoulders, feeling his heartbeat against her chest, strong and rapid. They'd survived, against professional killers, against a corporate conspiracy, against a mentor who'd betrayed them twice. They'd survived. Together. And, as dawn began to break on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Alexis realized something that terrified her more than the mercenaries ever had. She didn't want to face whatever came next without Ethan beside her. After 10 years of walls and anger and deliberate distance, she was finally ready to let him back in. But would forgiveness be enough to heal a decade of wounds? Or were some betrayals too deep to ever truly overcome? Could 2 broken people, scarred by betrayal and bound by a shared past, actually find their way back to each other? Or would the weight of a decade's worth of pain prove too heavy to carry forward? By dawn, the police were taking statements, and an investigation was underway that would send shockwaves through the entire tech industry. The evidence Alexis and Ethan had gathered, the encrypted emails, the shell company transactions, the testimony from Marcus, and now the captured mercenary who was already cutting deals with prosecutors to save his own skin. It all pointed directly to Titan Energy Ventures and Professor Braxton's Strategic Operations Division. The conspiracy that had loomed over them for 10 years, that had stolen their dreams and nearly stolen their lives, was finally unraveling in the harsh light of day. Exhausted, Alexis sat on the back bumper of an ambulance, a foil emergency blanket draped around her shoulders. Her natural curls were a damp, tangled mess. Her designer work clothes were ruined, torn, mud-stained, spotted with blood that wasn't hers. There was a bruise forming on her arm where the mercenary had grabbed her, already turning purple against her brown skin. She looked like she'd survived a war. Which, in a way, she had. Ethan stood beside her, refusing medical attention until the paramedics had checked her thoroughly. He had a cut above his eyebrow that probably needed stitches, his shirt was ripped, and his knuckles were scraped raw. But he kept his eyes on Alexis, as if afraid that looking away might make her disappear. As a paramedic walked off after confirming she had no serious injuries beyond bruising and shock, Alexis tilted her head back and looked at the sky. Streaks of pink and orange were spreading across the horizon, pushing back the darkness. A new day. They'd made it through the night. She glanced at Ethan, who was watching the sunrise with an expression she couldn't quite read. In that gentle morning light, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to see in years. Not the hardened CEO who'd betrayed her, not the guilty rival who'd spent a decade making amends through charity and regret, but the earnest 22-year-old who'd given her his jacket on a cold morning after an all-night lab session. The young man who'd panicked over a minor burn on her arm, whose hands had shaken as he applied first aid because he cared so much. The friend who'd made an impossible choice to save his dying sister, a choice that destroyed the best friendship either of them had ever known. "Ethan," she said softly. He turned to her immediately, concern still clouding his grey eyes. Before fear or pride could stop her, before she could rebuild those protective walls, Alexis continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you. For everything. For warning me when you could have stayed silent. For standing beside me when you could have walked away. I might not be here if you hadn't." She gestured vaguely back toward the lab and the chaos of the night, unable to finish the sentence. His eyes met hers, intense and sincere in a way that made her chest ache. "There's nothing to thank," he said quietly. "I wasn't going to let anything happen to you. I've done enough in the past to hurt you. I wasn't about to fail you again." She swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. Emotions she'd kept locked away for a decade surged up, demanding to be felt, to be acknowledged. The unresolved tension, the betrayal that had shaped the last 10 years of her life, the lonely nights spent hating him from afar, the relief of still being alive and the terror of how close they'd come to dying. It all crashed together like waves against rocks. "Ethan, about the past," she began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. She'd held on to her anger for so long it had become part of her identity. Her armor, her fuel. But after tonight, after he'd risked his life for hers, that anger felt more like a burden than a shield. He seemed to understand what she couldn't yet articulate. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion and emotion in every line of his face. "Alexis, I know I hurt you. I made the wrong choice back then, not in wanting to save Chloe, because I'd make that decision again in a heartbeat, but in how I handled it. I should have fought Titan with you, should have trusted you with the truth sooner. Maybe we could have found another way together." His voice cracked with the weight of years of regret. "I will always regret how I let you down, how I broke your trust. I'm so sorry." Tears welled in Alexis's eyes, blurring the sunrise into watercolor streaks. Hearing him finally say it, the apology she wasn't sure she'd ever receive, the acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused, the admission that he'd been wrong, it was like a knot inside her chest loosening after being pulled tight for 10 years. "I blamed you for so long," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I used that anger to push myself forward, to build Morgan energy, to prove I didn't need anyone. But it also kept me stuck in the past, reliving that betrayal over and over. When I saw you at conferences, I told myself I felt nothing but hate, but—" She took a shaky breath, and the truth spilled out. It was never just hate. It was hurt. And grief for what we'd lost. And maybe— Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Maybe a little of what might have been, if things had been different. Ethan gently reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm despite the chill of the morning. She let him. Let herself feel the comfort of that touch instead of flinching away. "Alexis, I never stopped admiring you," he said, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your strength, your brilliance, your determination to change the world. It intimidated me and inspired me all at once. Every time I read about Morgan Energy's latest innovation, every time I saw you, on a magazine cover or giving a keynote speech, I felt this overwhelming pride. And then immediate anger at myself for not being by your side, achieving those things together like we'd planned." He looked down at their joined hands. "I know I lost the right to be in your life when I broke your trust. I wasn't sure you could ever forgive me. Frankly, I wasn't sure I deserved it." Alexis squeezed his hand, And despite everything, the exhaustion, the trauma, the mud and rain and fear, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. Maybe we both deserved a bit of misery for our mistakes. I shut everyone out after you, you know. Built walls so high nobody could climb them. I was so afraid to trust again, so determined never to be vulnerable. It's been lonely at the top. A tear escaped down her cheek, and Ethan reached up with his free hand to brush it away, a gesture so gentle and familiar it made her breath catch. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said softly. The words carried double meaning. Professionally, they'd clearly worked together going forward, their companies allied rather than rival. But personally, there was a door opening between them, one both had thought sealed shut forever. Alexis, ever proud and cautious even in this vulnerable moment, let out a shaky laugh to lighten the emotional weight. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We have a lot to sort out. A decade's worth of baggage doesn't disappear just because we survived a firefight together." Ethan chuckled, relief flooding his features. "Fair enough. One step at a time, right?" She nodded, echoing her own words from that diner conversation that felt like years ago instead of just over a week. One step at a time. But then she added, softer, testing the waters, "Maybe that next step is breakfast? I think we've earned it. And I'm starving." Turns out running for your life works up an appetite. Ethan's smile was bright and boyish, wiping away years of stress and guilt from his face. He looked younger suddenly, more like the grad student she'd fallen in friend love with all those years ago. "I know a great place that makes amazing waffles, and I happen to owe you a meal, technically about 10 years overdue." Alexis actually laughed, a sound of genuine happiness that surprised her with its ease. "We'll call it a peace summit over waffles." "That sounds perfect." As they walked toward Ethan's car, side by side, their fingers not quite entwined but brushing occasionally, neither pulling away, the first full rays of sun broke over the horizon, illuminating the world in gold. It felt symbolic, almost too perfectly timed to be real. Like the universe itself was acknowledging this moment, this shift from darkness into light, from enmity into something that could, maybe, with time and care, become love again. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was extraordinary. The tech press had an absolute field day. Headlines exploded across every major publication: Titan Energy's dark secret, billionaire. Rivals unite to expose corporate conspiracy, the tech scandal that could change everything. The story had everything journalists dreamed of: corporate corruption, assassination attempts, 2 charismatic CEOs with a hidden history, and a revolutionary technology that had been deliberately suppressed. Professor Braxton and 3 Titan Energy executives, including CEO Howard Vance, were indicted on charges ranging from conspiracy and attempted murder to corporate espionage and racketeering. The evidence was overwhelming. The captured mercenary sang like a bird once his lawyer explained the prison time he was facing. The story of how Alexis Morgan and Ethan Cross, former graduate school partners turned bitter rivals, had joined forces to take down the conspiracy became the narrative everyone wanted to tell. Tech podcasts dissected every angle. Business schools started preparing case studies. A streaming service even reached out about developing it into a limited series, which both Alexis and Ethan politely declined. They issued a joint statement about cooperating to bring innovative clean energy technology to market safely, emphasizing the environmental and social impact rather than the drama. They kept the deeply personal details of their history private, protecting what was theirs alone. The revolutionary battery technology, the dream they'd built together at 22 and lost, then reclaimed a decade later, was finally developed and prepared for launch. But Alexis made sure it was positioned not just as a product, but as a mission, a promise kept. This wasn't about profit margins or quarterly earnings. This was about providing affordable, accessible, clean power to communities that needed it most. The tech would be licensed widely, with reasonable terms, ensuring that no one corporation, not even Morgan Energy, could hoard it or bury it ever again. Both companies agreed to this approach immediately, learning from the painful lesson of what happens when innovation gets locked away by greed. And through all of this, the legal proceedings, the press conferences, the product development, the endless meetings with lawyers and engineers and investors, Alexis and Ethan's relationship continued to heal and slowly, carefully grow into something new. There were many late-night conversations, processing the past, understanding each other's perspectives, working through the layers of hurt and resentment that had calcified over 10 years. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, old wounds reopening, arguments where they had to walk away and cool down before coming back together. Forgiveness, they learned, wasn't a single moment of absolution. It was a choice made over and over, day after day, to choose understanding over anger, compassion over resentment. Alexis learned about Ethan's struggles in detail. The weight of guilt he'd carried every single day since signing that NDA, the nightmares about betraying her, the charitable work he'd thrown himself into as penance. She met Chloe, now a healthy 25-year-old studying oncology at Johns Hopkins, inspired by her own survival to help others fighting cancer. Chloe hugged Alexis tight when they first met and tearfully thanked her for giving her big brother a second chance. "He talks about you all the time," Chloe said with a knowing smile. "Has for years. I always told him he should reach out, try to explain, but he was convinced you'd never want to hear from him." That conversation made Alexis realize something profound. Forgiving Ethan wasn't just freeing him from guilt. It was freeing herself from a decade of bitterness that had shaped too many of her choices. Ethan, for his part, got to know Alexis's family in a way he never had before. She invited him to Atlanta, nervous and uncertain how her parents would receive him, given the vague explanations she'd offered years ago about why her MIT partnership had ended so badly. But her family welcomed him with the kind of warmth that comes naturally to people who value community and second chances. They attended Sunday service at her grandmother's church, where the gospel choir made the walls vibrate, and the sermon about redemption and forgiveness seemed almost too on the nose. Afterwards, at the family barbecue in her parents' backyard, filled with aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, soul food and laughter and music, Ethan confessed he hadn't felt so at home in years. Alexis watched him make her little cousins giggle with goofy faces, saw him help her grandmother carry dishes without being asked, noticed how he listened intently when her father talked about his own career struggles as a black man trying to break into management in the 70s. Her mother pulled her aside at one point and said, simply, "He's a good man, sweetheart, and he looks at you like you hung the moon." Alexis blinked back tears and replied, "I know, Mama. I'm starting to believe that maybe we deserve another chance." For the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her work and personal life didn't have to be walled off from each other, where she could have both success and love, where vulnerability wasn't weakness but strength. 6 months after that terrifying night, Morgan Energy and Cross Industries held a joint press conference to announce the official launch of their clean energy battery technology. The event was held in San Francisco, in a gleaming convention center packed with journalists, investors, environmental activists, and curious onlookers. Both companies' stock had soared on the news. But more importantly, pre-orders were flooding in from municipalities, developing nations, and humanitarian organizations who saw the potential to bring reliable power to communities that had never had consistent electricity. Alexis stood at the podium in a sharp blue suit, her natural curls styled elegantly, looking every inch the successful CEO she'd fought so hard to become. But when she spoke, her words weren't about profit or market dominance. They were about purpose. 10 years ago, a brilliant young team developed technology that could have changed the world, she began, her voice carrying across the hushed room. That technology was stolen, buried, suppressed by people who valued short-term profit over long-term progress. Today, we're proving that innovation cannot be permanently silenced. That principle can triumph over corruption, and that second chances, whether for technology or for people, are worth fighting for. Ethan spoke next, and his words complemented hers perfectly. "This launch represents more than just a product," he said. "It represents a commitment to transparency, to ethical business practices, and to the idea that companies can compete without destroying each other. Morgan Energy and Cross Industries will continue to be rivals in many markets. Healthy competition drives innovation. But on this project, we're partners, because some things are bigger than corporate rivalry. Some dreams are worth setting aside ego to achieve. The press conference ended with thunderous applause, and as Alexis and Ethan stood side by side for photographs, their hands briefly touched, a small gesture that spoke volumes to anyone paying attention, which of course the press was. Speculation about their personal relationship had been quietly bubbling for months, fed by the way they looked at each other during interviews, the inside jokes that slipped into professional presentations, the comfortable familiarity that went beyond mere business partnership. That evening, they escaped the media circus and returned to that same 24-hour diner near Golden Gate Park where they'd first agreed to work together. It had become their spot, a place where they could be just Alexis and Ethan, not CEO Morgan and CEO Cross. She ordered sweet potato pie, he ordered a burger, and they sat across from each other in that worn booth, smiling like fools. "We did it," Alexis said, shaking her head in wonder. "We actually did it. Reclaimed the technology, exposed the conspiracy, survived attempted murder, and launched a product that's going to change lives. We make a pretty good team," Ethan replied, then added with a meaningful look, "Always did." She reached across the table and took his hand, no longer hesitant or uncertain. "Always will." Their story became more than just a boardroom drama or a tech industry scandal. It became a lesson, shared in business schools and keynote speeches, written about in think pieces and case studies. The lesson of integrity over easy shortcuts. Alexis's journey highlighted that standing by your principles might cost you in the short term, but it defines who you are and sets the foundation for long-term success. She'd nearly lost everything by refusing to be bought off in grad school, but that choice had set her on a path to building something genuine and lasting. The lesson of understanding before judgment. Ethan's choice, while devastating to Alexis, had come from a place of love and desperation. Understanding his full story, the impossible position he'd been in, didn't erase the hurt, but it provided context that made forgiveness possible. In life, we rarely know what battles others are fighting when they disappoint us. A little empathy can reveal truths that pride hides. The lesson of forgiveness and second chances, both of them discovered that holding on to resentment only prolongs pain. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing wrongdoing, but it allows healing and growth. By forgiving Ethan, Alexis freed herself to embrace happiness again. By forgiving himself and making genuine amends, Ethan proved that people can grow from their worst mistakes. The lesson of teamwork and trust. They had achieved incredible things separately, building billion-dollar companies through sheer determination. But it was only when they finally trusted each other again and combined their strengths that they defeated a threat neither could have overcome alone and accomplished what they'd always dreamed of. True partnership, whether in business or in love, is built on trust, communication, and the willingness to be vulnerable. The lesson of courage in the face of adversity. When confronted with powerful opposition and literal danger, they didn't back down. Alexis demonstrated remarkable bravery by standing up to corporate bullies, and even in physical peril, she kept her composure and acted decisively. Ethan showed courage by leaving a corrupt corporation even when staying would have been easier and more profitable, and later, by risking everything to do what was right. Together, they reminded everyone watching that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear, doing what's right even when it's hard. 1 year after that night in the lab, on a cool evening in early autumn, Ethan proposed. Not at some fancy restaurant or during a grand public gesture, but in the same MIT lab where they'd first built their prototype together. He'd arranged access through the university, and they stood in that familiar space where their story had begun, older now, scarred but stronger, carrying a decade's worth of wisdom that their younger selves couldn't have imagined needing. "I loved you then," Ethan said quietly, holding both her hands. "When we were kids chasing a dream, I loved you through the years we spent apart, even when I thought I'd lost the right to. And I love you now, more deeply than I knew possible, because I know what it means to lose you and be given the grace to find you again." Alexis was crying openly, not caring that tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she said, before he even finished pulling out the ring. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 6 months later, in a ceremony that blended both their worlds, her grandmother's church in Atlanta, filled with both families, business associates, and the joint engineering team that had helped bring their dream to fruition. Chloe was a bridesmaid. Alexis's little cousins were flower girls. And when the pastor spoke about forgiveness, redemption, and love that endures through trials, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Their wedding wasn't just the union of two people. It was the symbol of a journey, from friendship to betrayal, from rivalry to alliance, from hurt to healing, and finally to love. A love that had been tested by fire and emerged tempered, stronger, unbreakable. In the end, Alexis Morgan and Ethan Cross's tale is one of redemption and reunion. They transformed a decade of unresolved tension and betrayal into an alliance forged in trust and affection. Their love story didn't bloom in the naive optimism of youth, but in the hard-earned wisdom and mutual respect of two people who'd been broken and chose to heal together. As partners in both life and work, they moved forward to quite literally light the world with clean energy, a legacy born from a dream deferred and a love renewed. Their journey showed that even in the cutthroat modern tech industry, human connections and moral principles still matter. It's a reminder that behind every rivalry or betrayal lies a potential for understanding. That success is sweetest when shared with someone who truly knows you. That forgiveness is not weakness, but the ultimate strength. And that sometimes the person you think is your worst enemy, the one who hurt you most deeply, can turn out to be the ally, the partner, the love you needed all along. Because life isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what we do after we make them. It's about whether we let our worst moments define us or use them as stepping stones toward becoming better. It's about choosing courage over fear, understanding over judgment, and love over bitterness. Alexis and Ethan chose all of those things. And in doing so, they didn't just reclaim a stolen technology or expose corporate corruption. They reclaimed themselves, their dreams, their future, and they proved that second chances, when earned through genuine change and fought for with everything you have, are worth every painful step of the journey. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Ethan's position? Would you have taken the deal to save your sister, or fought alongside your friend, even if it meant risking someone you love? Have you ever had to forgive someone who betrayed you, or been forgiven for a mistake that felt unforgivable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next tale of resilience, redemption, and the complicated truth that people aren't simply good or evil. We're all just trying our best with impossible choices. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that forgiveness is possible, that second chances exist, and that the people who hurt us can sometimes become the ones who save us. Thank you for joining me on Alexis and Ethan's journey. Until next time, remember, your past doesn't have to define your future, and the bridges you thought were burned might just need someone brave enough to rebuild them.
Thank you so much for watching, and if you love American stories, subscribe, like, and comment what you want me to do next.